final speaker, Luca. I think Luca will have a more interactive presentation. He will. Am I right, Luca? You will share a link and.
Yeah, that's right. The topic of the session is scaling agile or agility at scale. And I would like to start immediately with sharing some links on the chat. And I will ask you to open those 3 links right now in your browser. We will use those links during the presentation. Let me know when you are done with giving me a thumb up. You find a reaction button in the in Zoom. So give me a thumb up when you are done, one like this. As you see, those 3 links, one is the home page of the principles that I'm going to present. They introduce a very short summary of the principles. The second document is a Google Doc. There you find a detailed description of the principles, and I will ask you to have a look at it. And the third one is Slido. It is a tool to ask questions and also to vote questions. So I will start to answer from the questions that have more votes. When you post a question or a comment on Slido, have a name or a nickname so we can involve you in the conversation. You will switch the camera on if you want, but for sure the audio. Okay, is everyone done with the principles? Sorry, with opening the links, is everyone done? Okay, I take it like a yes, and let me quickly give you an overview of the principles. So, the topic, as I mentioned, is an approach to scale agile and to scale agility guided by principles. What it means? It means that instead of using one framework approach, or instead of using one framework by the book approach, the approach that I'm suggesting is to, here we go, is to scale guided by the principles. When I'm talking about scaling, I'm talking about organizations that have delivery initiatives that involve multiple teams, or organizations where a single teams work on multiple products, or organizations that apply agile beyond software development in the whole organization and in all the departments. These principles has been drafted by Giovanni Asproni and myself, and then has been developed with the help from the whole organization. My name is Luca Minudel. I'm working Lean and Agile since the very beginning of the Agile movement, so it's about 20 years. And because of that, I have the privilege to be to experience firsthand genuine Agile and what good Agile really looks like. And I also work in organizations that adopted Lean and Agile principle for the whole organization. For example, ThoughtWorks itself is driven by Lean and Agile principle, the whole organization. Scuderia Ferrari used Lean and Agile principle for software development, but for sure also the rest of the organization was influenced and inspired by the Toyota production system, and so by Lean. As I mentioned, many contributions with these principles come from the Lean and Agile community, and the goal of these principles itself is to crystallize the wisdom, many years of wisdom from the Lean and Agile community itself. As I mentioned before, feel free to start to ask a question about the principles, and you can have a look at the document while I speak. So what's the problem with scaling Agile following one framework, or even worse, one framework and by the book? Every framework assumes a certain context, a context where that framework works best. But then your company, your organization itself have its own context. What does it make an organization context? Think about the culture, the people that work in the organization, the company history, its strength and weakness, the market the organization works in, their customers, the competitors, the products, the challenges that you face every day in the organization. All those things define a context. And the bigger the framework is, the smaller the context is where the framework works well. So here we have the principles to the rescue. The idea is that when you use instead the pluralistic approach, where you take ideas from every frameworks, and then you can take ideas from the patterns and the practices that you find in the broader Agile community, then you can use the principles to guide yourself, to give you a direction, and to find a way among all these practices and ideas. Now, I encourage you to switch to the Google Doc or to the home page and start to look at the principles. I just give you two quick information to orient you through the principles. They are organized in two parts. The first part is about testing the real need for scaling, because after you start scaling, everything becomes more difficult. So the idea is first to check if you really need to scale, and eventually create a precondition to scale on the first place before you start. Two of the principles in part one talk about dependencies. And dependencies make a huge role when you scale Agile in an organization, because the more dependencies you have, the more people is involved, more teams are involved in the delivery initiative. And as a consequence, communication and coordination take longer, and it also becomes more difficult. Then you start to take suboptimal decisions, and then this leads to more dependencies itself. You see, this leads to a loop of dam, a vicious circle where things become bigger and bigger and more people get involved. I saw two companies that were doing basically the same work. One company had 40 people, the other company had between 400 and 500 people to do exactly the same kind of work. So first thing is to do what you need to, for example, involving technical excellence, remove technical debt, remove accidental dependencies in order to check if you really need to scale. The second part of the principles, part two, so from principle 5 to principle 9, then start to give you a direction of travel to scale successfully and sustainably. The moment that you see that you do really need to scale, then you can look at this principle to actually scale. And one of the key ideas that you find in principle number 5 is that the people is the most important element for an organization, the most flexible and adaptable one. And in order to scale effectively, you should focus on scaling collaborations between individuals, but also collaboration between teams and departments. Scaled framework typically focus on the most tangible and visible element that are structures, role, processes. But when we talk about the success of scaling, those are secondary element. The key element in the success of scaling is the relationship and the collaboration between people, team, and department. These things are less tangible, but are also the most powerful and important. Another key point of part 2 is don't scale it until you nail it. Until you have something that works. I mean, one or a few teams that excel in working well, you don't have anything to scale. You would scale a mess if you start to scale without having something that works well. And then when you have something that works well, the approach is to experiment, learn, adapt, and evolve your way of working continuously. For example, using a retrospective, doing experiment, and then during the retrospective, evaluating what it works. And while you do that, be guided by Lean and Agile principles, like those in the Agile Manifesto, like the Lean principles, like the principles that and values that you find in extreme programming, as well as in Scrum, and also be guided by human complexity theory, the theory of human complex adaptive system, and the scale informed by indicators and metrics to see if what you are doing is working well. Okay, now I would like to give you sometimes a few minutes if you need to go through the principles, looking at the home page or looking at the Google Doc and ask some questions. So I will stand by a few minutes until you read and have the questions.
In the meantime, I was exploring the document, Luca. The slide where you showed Emerson's book with the 12 principles of efficiency. Can you say something about that book? I never heard about it.
Can you repeat which book?
Harrington Emerson's 12 principles of efficiency. You had 2 slides on it.
Well, yeah, that book is from the 1800th century. The most important thing about the book is what the book highlights about principles. That while methods can be thousand and very different, principles are few and extremely powerful. So the idea that given that we are suggesting a pluralistic approach, where you can use practices and ideas from all the frameworks, then you need the principles to guide you. And that's the key point.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, I'm sharing with you again the links on the chat if you lost it. And I'm waiting for you to have a look at the principles on the Google Doc and to ask questions on slide.
I got one already, Luca.
Yeah, let's wait for more questions and let's give time to people to vote the questions.
Yeah, any question, just write them. Any questions, just write them on the website.
Manu, I saw you posted a question on the Zoom chat. Have a look at the last link on Slido, and can you post it here, please? Or let me know if you want me to add it to Slido for you. The questions are coming. Let me see if I can share a view. Yeah, and can you see the questions? Let me see if I can zoom a little. Okay, I think we are starting soon with the first question. So, in your experience, why do companies actually like to scale agility? Which benefit are they after? Who asked these questions? Do you want to intervene? Unmute yourself and feel free to speak.
Hi, Luca. Good to see you here. I'm just after the initial motivation in your experience when you talk to companies who like to embrace scaling. What are they after? I see, for instance, in Scaled Agile Framework, to have a clear PI planning and then a deliverable at a certain timeline suggests that the company is very much after predictability, and sees that predictability is a great benefit whilst using agile practices. But I'm just really curious about your experience. Why do big companies want to scale? What are the thought processes behind it, and what's the motivation behind it?
Well, it depends. Recently, many large companies want to adopt agile. And given that they are bigger companies, the idea from them is that, oh, I'm a big company that I need something big. I need to scale agile. So that is one of the motivation. Inside those companies, there are very different mindset. I like the distinction that has been done a while ago between a community of needs versus community of solutions. So on the community of needs, you have experimenters, people that feel comfortable to be constantly in research and development approach. And so they are keen to experiment, to try things, and use all the literature as an inspiration to see how to do things and then to see what it works for them. Then instead you have companies that have a mindset that resemble more the community of solutions, and their mindset is different. Is, oh, I have a problem, I want an expert that tell me what is the best solution, and then I want to implement it. And this is more similar to the example that you just made.
Wonderful. Thank you, Luca.
Thank you, Sven. Nice to see you again. Sven contributed, provided some feedback to the principles. So, okay, I think we can move to the next question. And the next question is, how do you define nailed it? Who asked this question? Do you want to unmute yourself and intervene?
Sorry, Luca. That was me again.
Oh, go, please go.
Again, it's just to see. Quite often, it's hard to know when you are there, right? When is the right time? And if a company follows your suggestions and say, okay, just nail it first. It's a question of when is that? Like how do you define cornerstones of when it is actually necessary or desirable to then try to scale, instead of resorting to your principles and reducing dependencies, for instance.
Yeah.
So what are the KPIs when is the right moment to decide to actually make the next step?
So in the home page of the principles, near the end of the page, there is an article titled "How Large and Successful Organizations Achieved Agility at Scale." Not all of those organizations, but many of those organizations started to adopt Agile at team level. So first they started to introduce the key concept of Agile way of working at team level, bottom up. They started experimenting in one department with a few teams. They started to introduce that mindset and that way of working inside the organization. They started to see what is the impact on the organization in terms of way of working, in terms of collaboration, in terms of company culture, and they started to see how to merge the two together and how to make it work. After they started to see that they start to become more effective, they become able to deliver things more frequently, they become able to interact with the customer more effectively, they become able to get feedback after they release things and actually steer and drive the development toward a more successful direction. When they start to see these small successes, then they start to involve more teams. So that is the idea, to have a gradual approach. After more teams has been involved, then the leadership say, okay, now we want to build on what we achieved so far. We want to build on the concept that we learned, and we want to extend agility in a more substantial way. Not only at the product level, not only at middle management level, but also with the leadership. And I think they see if things are improving or not, is the sense that they become more capable, more successful, and they tackle the key challenges that they were in place before. So I cannot suggest standard metrics. It depends on what is the starting point. Does this make sense, Sven?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it would have been, well, questionable, wonderful if there were clear guidelines, but yeah, obviously it obviously depends, and yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Thank you, Sven. The next question, let me check that. Best way to begin scaling: start small and grow, or big bang? Again, can you unmute yourself?
Hi, Luca, it's Clint. I asked that question. I think you just answered it, though. I think it's interesting, though, that, you know, programs like SAFE, they often profess, you know, train the whole building and just go in more of a big bang approach. But what you said, belying the principles, is to build on success as you go. So,
yeah, and there are two reasons for that. The first one is that there are no recipes. As I mentioned before, every framework has its own context, but it doesn't mean that that context, that framework will be right for your organization. You have to find out. And in order to find out, you have to experiment, see what works, what doesn't, and learn from that. So there is no other way that doing it incrementally. The second reason that I noticed in large organizations and in banks is that the first time that you approach an agile adoption, you do that using the concept and the tools that you have in place. So if you are a traditional company, you will approach your adoption of agile ways of working at scale with a program, with the target operating model, and with endpoint defined up front. So basically doing waterfall, and we know that doesn't work. So many banks in their first adoption like this, they fail. But what they do achieve is start to introduce the concept of iterative approach and all the other concepts. So then there is the second wave. They a few time later they try to do that again, but then they start from a different starting point, and not a waterfall program, but a more agile program. And then they start to scale in an agile way, and these start to work even better. Does this answer your question?
Oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I know some companies they get bought into some of the marketing and they just want to write a big check and have become agile next month, right? I think that there's a fallacy there too, that you can just pay for it and it happens.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, that's very true. In the article that I mentioned before, for all those big companies, achieving agility has been a journey, and a multi-year journey. We are talking between 5 and 10 years. So it is not a sprint, it is a marathon. And that heartbeat of continuously experimenting, learning, improving, that way of continuous improvement that is sustainable, that is what can work. Cool. Thank you. Let's see the next question. How and when will you decide which agile framework? Okay. Again, unmute yourself. Who asked that question?
Hi, Luca. It's Nadia here.
Yeah. Hi, Nadia.
Hello. I'm just curious to know, so does the type of agile framework influences the decision of how it gets adopted? Or what is the impact your principles also have? Do your principles help, or is the decision already made by the company or the corporation about what are they going to use?
Well, we were just discussing before, many traditional companies would like to write a big check, call some external expert that will install Agile in a limited time with the granted success. The company that think in those terms may choose frameworks that are more similar, that look more similar to their traditional values, waterfall values. So framework that focus a lot on processes and structure. The companies that have been more successful in achieving agility at scale instead adopt a more pluralistic approach. They start from the Agile Manifesto. They start with the lightweight frameworks such as extreme programming, Scrum, Kanban, Lean, and then they start to look at the Lean and Agile community and start to look at the practices at organization level. And so they do not choose a specific framework. I'm not sure, does this answer your question?
Yeah, yes. And what's the dichotomy between your principles? Does your principle help in any way?
In what?
In the choice of framework, do your principles help in any way? Do they guide of how it gets implemented, for example, a particular framework that was chosen?
No, actually the principles advise against adopting one framework, but instead the principles advise to use ideas and practices from potentially every frameworks and from all the practices and the principles available from the Lean Agile community. When you get involved in the Lean and Agile community, you will discover that the Lean and Agile community is in a constant status of creativity, and they are constantly experimenting and inventing new practices and new patterns and new way to do things. So the principles explicitly say, do not adopt one framework, but bring ideas from as many frameworks as you want. The frameworks that are, I already mentioned the lightweight one. I will mention, for example, LESS or Scaled Agile, that are very principle-based and lightweight. I will advise they are very focused on processes and structure. So those are less compatible with the approach suggested by the principles.
Okay. Great, thank you.
Thank you, Nadia. Let's see what's the next question. Oh yeah, here. Under scaling having a hard limit, yes, can you give an example where you have seen this limit? Yeah, Andy, do you want to talk? Can you unmute yourself?
Hi, Luca. Hi, it's Andy here. Yeah, so under the principles, obviously, I think it was section 8, you mentioned that hard limit. So I was just interested whether you can give an example of, maybe you've worked with a company, you've gone in, and either there's been too many people, too many different teams, and you felt that that has impacted the effectiveness of delivering, and maybe you've had to scale back from that situation. If you could talk a little bit around how you've done that, the effects of that, and yeah.
Yeah, makes sense. Well, it's pretty common for organizations that don't adopt Agile and instead use a traditional way of working. It's pretty common to have a lot of people working on the same things and to have a lot of work in progress. And then you start to realize, when this is the case, when you see that they already have hit the limit, you see that you are spending more time managing people, try to coordinate them, try to build consensus, try to decide what to do, than actually doing the work. And this is something that is extremely visible. Sometimes you can notice it even when you start to work with the team. Sometimes you can find a large team with 30 people, and you realize that the team is incredibly ineffective. And so the approach is to break down the work in autonomous chunks of work that can be worked in parallel. And usually it means work on different products or on different parts of the products that are independent. And so to make everyone autonomous. I was reading the other day a report from a program manager where they had 150 people working on a project, and this program manager went to his boss and said to send home 100 more people, or to move them in on another initiative, because basically they were inefficient. And does this?
Yeah, and I guess really, I take your point. I was just wondering whether you've seen in situations where a company's actually implemented some form of scaling Agile and they've had too many teams. Because I think you're talking maybe about, the company's not done anything in terms of going towards Agile or scaling Agile. But even when they've done that, and they have, I don't know, scrum of scrums or whatever they're doing, and they're still at a hard limit. Yeah. And then you've had to maybe scale that back. Any examples in that?
Yeah, you usually there are two things. I think it all goes back, especially on this limit. It all goes back on the dependencies. Dependencies on the dependencies on the code base, so technical dependencies, and the people and business dependencies. When this happened in agile organization that are already doing agile, you can notice it in a big initiative that involve a lot of teams. For example, recently GDPR, the feature about the privacy of data, many companies implemented that feature, and that feature was cross-cutting across the old product and all the teams, and they have to involve a lot of people together. And suddenly because the way they approached it, and suddenly there are an incredible number of dependencies and coordination. And then the companies, maybe they try to the first things that they try is to bring in a project manager to deal with the coordination. In this case, when I'm talking about companies that are already doing agile, scaling agile, it's not about scaling back, like sending people home. It's about working to break down the dependencies and to make the teams autonomous. Or other times is to realize that putting more people and more teams on that work will not speed the work up because there are bottlenecks caused by dependencies. You can actually monitor the throughput and see that you can see that having more people does not increase the throughput.
Yeah, no, that's good. Thank you for that. Thanks, Luca.
Thank you, Andy, for your question. Could you please elaborate on collaboration principles? Number 5. Again, can you unmute yourself if you are still here? No. Is the author of that question still here or has left? So I think since the person that asked this question is not here, I will just skip over it. And we go to the last question. Instead of installing a framework, they should work in removing obstacles to embrace agility. Yes, is the author of this comment?
Yeah, look, I found it on the chat. It's Leonardo, but I saw
yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, do you want
Hello,
to add
Luca?
something?
Yeah, hello, Luca. Nice work with the principal, I guess. Yeah, it wasn't a question, but
Yes, it's a comment. Go ahead. Make your comment. Do you want to add something?
yeah. It was referred to what you said before regarding the consultants that install the framework in a company. And in my experience, I worked for a company that tried to install Scrum in the company without preparing so much the teams and the people from the developers to the management, and they really I think failed in some way. And I think that the mindset should be the first thing we should install or embrace in a company, because if it isn't, it's hard to make all the changes we want to do. I don't know if you have some example for that, or to I don't know.
Well, what you say make a lot of sense. The point is to remove obstacle, embrace a new mindset, and do it gradually, because the mindset itself, the agile way of working, agility require a constant loop of experimentation, learning, and evolution. And it is not something that you install. It is not something that have an end state, and it is not something that you can buy. Some companies ask exactly that to some consultancy firm, and that's what they get. But that's not how it works. So I totally agree with your point, and actually the principles are pointing exactly in that direction.
Do you think it can be useful to do an assessment to understand the maturity of a company to embrace agility and to identify obstacles in it?
Well, the principles can help in that direction, not to formulate an assessment like to rate and to give rate or a scale, but you can look at the principles and you can compare the principle with what the organization is doing. So
Yeah.
one, for example, of the principles give you a way to assess and evaluate the precondition for scaling. And you can see, do we have the precondition in place to start to scale? Do we know what is the situation with our dependencies in terms of people and code base? Do we know what is the goals of scaling? Do we want to scale for impact? Do we want to scale for fitness for purpose? Do we want to scale for productivity, or do we just want to scale to increase the headcount? So those are all things that you can look through part one of the principle. Part two of the principles, you can use it even if you are already scaling using another framework, and you can see how much what you are doing is in sync with those principles. And then you can ask yourself, is this because we are doing something better, or is because we are missing something? And if you are missing something, what are the consequences? So I will use it in that way, more than coming back to you and say, oh, you are 10 out of 10, or you are just 1 out of 10. Does this make sense?
Yeah, too much. Are you going to leave the document, the shared document, open to changes in the next days? Or
yes, Slido will go away, but the Google Doc document will continue to accept comments, requests for changes, and also let me finish. And also in the coming days, if you need if you need to contact me, you can contact me here and continue to interact with me.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you to you. I think we answered all the questions. So I think James.
Yeah, definitely, Luca. You answered all the questions, and thank you so much for being so helpful to everyone. And I'm sure everyone found it very interesting. And I liked how interactive this was. It makes sense to do things this way. Keeps people involved. And thanks again, then, Luca, for your presentation. And thank you to all of our speakers. I hope to see you again soon. And as always, Tech Italia is an open community, so feel free to suggest, make any suggestions on the next topics to address, and if you would like to candidate as a speaker for future events, feel free to get in touch. So it's about time to end the meeting, but again, thank you to everyone. It was lovely to meet you. Thank you, a big thank you goes to our speakers, obviously, and to Sintra for sponsoring this event and making everything possible. So thank you to everyone, and you will obviously receive the usual email a few days after the event with contact details and link to presentations. So Goodbye to everyone.